Somebody ought to charge admission for this one. The whisper came from 3 rows back, and in a church that small a whisper carried like a shout. Ada Merrick kept her chin level and her eyes on the preacher's collar and did not turn around. Then came the laughing. Not the loud kind, the other kind. The kind that came out through the nose and got smothered in a glove. The kind a woman could feel on the back of her neck like a draft under a door. Cordelia Boyd started it. 2 more took it up. Somebody in the back said the word bargain, and somebody else said the word desperate, and the 2 words traveled the pews and met in the middle. Beside her, Silas Rourke stood with his burned hand held behind his back where nobody could see it, and the burned side of his face turned toward the wall, and he did not move at all. He had the stillness of a man who had learned that flinching only gave people more to enjoy. Then a small hand slid into Ada's. Nell Rourke was 7 years old and wore a blue dress 2 seasons too short at the wrist. She had come up the aisle without being told to and stopped at Ada's left side. And now she had Ada's fingers in a grip like fence wire. She did not look up. She turned and looked back at the crowd, at all those women with their gloves over their mouths, and she held that look until the laughing thinned out and went quiet and died in the corners of the room. She did not laugh. Not once. Not that day, and not any day since her mother went into the barn fire 3 winters back and did not come out. The preacher cleared his throat and finished the words, and Silas Rourke bent and put his lips against Ada's forehead for exactly 1 second, the way a man touches a hat brim, and that was the whole of the wedding. It had started 3 weeks before that, in the kitchen of the Pruitt boarding house, with Ada up to her elbows in gray water and a stack of 40 plates that had been 60 plates an hour earlier. She had been washing those plates for 11 years. Before that, she had washed plates in Grand Island, and before that, she had been a girl in a county home in Nebraska, with a bed by the window and nobody's last name but the one the matron wrote down. She was 34 years old. She was tall for a woman and broad through the shoulder, and her hands had been in hot water so long they had gone permanently red, and 8 years ago a man named Tom Ferris had promised to marry her and had instead taken the eastbound with a woman from Cheyenne, and Crow Hollow had never once let her forget it. They were kind about it. Mostly. That was the worst part. They were kind about it the way people are kind about a dog with 3 legs. Silas Rourke came in at 4 in the afternoon when the dining room was empty, and he sat at the corner table with his hat on his knee and ordered coffee he never drank. Ada knew him the way everybody knew him, the burnt man. He came to town twice a month for salt and coffee and nails, and children stared at him in the street, and their mothers pulled them away and then apologized to nobody in particular. The left side of his face was ridged and shining from the jaw to the temple. 2 fingers on his left hand had healed curled. He had gone into that barn for the horses and for Marta, who had gone in first, and he had come out with the horses. He waited until Mrs. Pruitt went upstairs. Then he stood up. "Miss Merrick, I have a thing to say, and I would rather say it badly and quick than badly and slow." Ada dried her hands on her apron and waited. "I need a woman on my place, not for me." He turned his hat once in his hands. "For my girl. She is 7. She has said maybe a dozen words in 3 years, and most of those were no. There is a woman needed in that house, and I am not it, and I have run out of other ideas. You are asking me to hire on. I am asking you to marry me. There is no other arrangement the county would leave alone, and I will not have that child talked about." He looked at the window instead of at her. "You would have your own room." "The east one. It has a stove in it. I would not come through that door, not ever, and you have my word on it, and you can have it in writing if a word from me is worth less than paper. I would pay you besides, whatever Pruitt pays you, out of the fall beef. If it does not suit you by spring, you may take the stage, and I will not say one word against you in this town." Ada stood there with the towel in her hands. "Why me?" "Because you fed my girl an egg 2 Christmases ago when we came through in the snow, and you cut the top off it and put the spoon in her hand and did not say one thing about her not talking." He put his hat on. "Everybody else says something." "They will laugh," she told him. "You know that. They will laugh at both of us. They laugh at me on Tuesdays for nothing at all." He went to the door. "You do not have to answer today." She answered him on Thursday. The Rourke place sat 9 miles northwest of town in a fold of country where the wind came down off the rim all winter and never got tired. A house of milled lumber gone silver, a barn that was new because the old one had burned and the new one had been built too fast by a man who could not stand to look at the black ground where the old one stood. 60 head of cattle where there had been 300. One old hand named Pike who stayed on for wages Silas could not always pay and would not admit he could not pay. Ada came out on the wagon with a carpet bag and a wooden box of her own kitchen things, and the first thing she noticed inside the house was the dust on the window glass, and the second thing was the 2 pegs by the door. Just 2. His coat on one. The other one bare. She hung her coat over the back of a chair that first night, and the next night too, and every night for 11 days. On the 12th morning, her coat was on the wall. There was a new peg under the other 2, set low, about the height of a child standing on a milking stool. It was a piece of broken broom handle. It had been driven in with a rock, and it went in crooked, and the nail beside it was bent flat, where somebody small had missed 4 or 5 times. Her coat hung on it, the collar folded wrong, the sleeve dragging the floorboard. Ada stood there in the cold kitchen for a long time. Nell came in behind her with the egg basket and went straight past to the table and set the basket down and did not look at her at all. That was the way it went with Nell. She was not a sullen child. She was a watching child. She followed Ada from room to room at a distance of about 8 feet, the way a barn cat follows a person carrying milk. And when Ada turned around, Nell would be studying the ceiling with tremendous interest. Silas came in for dinner at noon and saw the peg and stopped. He looked at it for the length of 3 breaths. He looked at the bent nail. Then he took his own coat off and hung it up and washed at the basin and sat down to his beans, and he did not say one word about it, and Ada, watching him from the stove, saw the muscle move once in the good side of his jaw. 2 nights later she set out the plates and found that Nell had moved her chair. It was no longer across the table. It was at the end, at the elbow of Ada's place, close enough that the child's knee bumped hers all through supper. Neither adult mentioned that either. The books were in a coffee tin on the top shelf of the pantry, and Ada found them in her 3rd week when she went hunting for Sailorotus. Marta Rourke had kept the accounts. Her hand was small and slanted, and it stopped in the middle of a page in the February of 1884, and after that there was nothing but a stack of envelopes from the Stockman's Bank of Crow Hollow, and 11 of them had never been opened at all. Ada sat down on the pantry floor with the lamp and opened all of them. She had been taught her letters and her sums by a matron in Nebraska who believed a girl who could cipher would never starve, and she had kept Delphine Pruitt's boarding house ledger for 9 years without ever once being thanked for it. She read the note. She read it 4 times. Then she got the stub of a pencil and worked the interest out on the back of a flour sack, and worked it again, and sat with the lamp burning down and her jaw set. She put it in front of Silas after supper, with Nell asleep in the loft. "Your note is $240, due the last Saturday of the month. I know what it is. You do not. Ada put the flour sack down and turned it so he could see the figures. The note says 7%. Harlan Boyd has been charging you 9, and he has been charging you a service on the late payments that is not written anywhere in this paper. 3 years of it. You have paid that man about $71 he had no right to ask for, and every dollar of it came out of the principal you never got to touch. Silas Rourke sat very still. He picked up the flour sack and held it at an angle to the lamp and read it slowly, his mouth moving a little, the way a man reads who was pulled out of school at 9 to hold a horse. Marta used to do this part. I know. I have signed everything he ever put in front of me. He set the sack down. 3 years. You were carrying a burned barn and a burying and a child who quit talking, Ada told him. A man cannot carry all of that and read the small print too. He looked up at her then, straight on, both sides of his face in the lamplight, which was a thing he never did. He looked at her for long enough that Ada felt her ears go hot and turned to the dishpan. Miss Merrick. There is no miss about it anymore. You may as well say Ada. Ada. He stood and took his hat. That is the first time in 3 years anybody in this county told me something true and did not want paying for it. Harlan Boyd rode out on a Sunday in a coat too good for the road. He did not get down. He sat his horse in the yard and talked about the dry summer and the price of beef and how a small outfit could not carry a note in a year like this one, and how a man of his position hated to see a neighbor go under, and how he would take the deed off Silas's hands for $400 and consider it a favor between Christians. The bottomland alone is worth 12, Ada said from the porch. Boyd looked at her the way a man looks at a chair that is spoken. Mrs. Rourke, he tipped his hat about 1/4 of an inch. My wife tells me the whole town turned out for your wedding. That is a rare compliment for a woman your age. They turned out for the show. Well, he gathered his reins. Folks do talk. Some say you married a scarred man for 160 acres. Some say he married a cook so he would not have to pay one. I do not repeat it myself. I only mention it so you know what the wind is saying. He touched his hat again and rode out. That was the last week of the month, and the week the talk got loud. It got loud in the Mercantile, where 2 women went quiet when Ada came in for thread and started up again at the door. It got loud at the smithy, where a man asked Silas whether he had got a wife or a hired girl and whether there was a difference at his prices. It got loud enough that Pike started riding into town for the supplies himself, without being asked, which was the kindest thing that dried-out old Cowboy knew how to do. And on the Thursday, Ada stood in the shadow of the barn door with a bucket in each hand and heard Pike say, out by the corral, that woman has turned this place around, and you know it. And she heard Silas Rourke say, I did not marry her for me. Pike, the girl needed somebody. That is the whole of it. Ada set the buckets down very carefully so they would not ring. She went back to the house and she made supper and she got through it, and after Nell went up she took her carpet bag out from under the bed and folded her 2 good dresses into it and put her mother's thimble in the toe of her spare shoe. The stage south left Crow Hollow on the last Saturday of the month at 9 in the morning. She had said spring. Spring was a long way off, and she was 34 years old, and she had spent 8 years being the funniest thing that ever happened to that town, and she found she could not do it a second time, not for a man who had already told the truth to somebody else in a corral. She slid the bag back under the bed and did not sleep. She did not know that Nell had come halfway down the loft ladder in the dark, the way that Child did on nights when the wind was up, and had seen the bag and had gone back up without a sound. The last Saturday of the month was Founder's Day, and Founder's Day in Crow Hollow meant trestle tables outside the church and every family in the county in one place from noon until dark. Silas had business at the bank at 10 and would not talk about it. Ada came in on the wagon with 4 dried apple pies because Delphine Pruitt had asked her for them a month before, and Ada Merrick had never in her life gone back on a promise about food. She told herself she would set the pies down and go to the stage office. The bag was under the seat, under a feed sack, where nobody would see it. Nell rode the whole 9 miles with her hand flat on the feed sack. The tables were laid by noon. There was fiddling and a horseshoe pitch and the smell of coffee and scorched sugar, and Ada put her pies at the end of the long table and stood back, and the talk went on around her the way water goes around a stone. Cordelia Boyd had a circle of 6 women near the coffee urn, and Cordelia Boyd had a carrying voice and did not intend otherwise. I only say she has done well for herself, a woman of that age. And him? Well, a pause built for the purpose. They say she has not once had to look at the left side of his face. He turns it to the wall, like a portrait somebody hung wrong. And the 6 of them laughed, and a few men by the horseshoe pit heard it and laughed too. Because laughing is a thing that spreads faster than fire in a hay barn. And inside of 10 seconds, a third of that churchyard was laughing at Ada Merrick Rourke and the man she had married. Silas had just come up from the road. He stopped at the gate with his hat in his hand and the bank paper folded in his coat, and he turned the burned side of his face toward the fence rail, and he took it, the way he had taken it for 3 years. Nell Rourke climbed up on the end of the bench. She was 7 years old and small for it, and she stood up on that bench in her blue dress and her mended stockings, and she said, in a voice that came out cracked and strange from 3 years of not being used, "Stop it." The nearest table went quiet first. Then the next one. Stop laughing at her. Cordelia Boyd's cup came down on its saucer with a small, hard sound. Somebody by the coffee urn said, "Lord have mercy, that is the Rourke child." Somebody else said, "She talks." The fiddler stopped in the middle of a bar, and the last of the laughing broke off in the middle and went out, and there was nothing in that churchyard but wind and one dog barking somewhere behind the livery. "Everybody laughed at my papa's wedding," Nell said. "I stood right there, and I heard all of you. I did not laugh. Not one time. Not one." Ada could not move. Her hands were flat on the table on either side of the pies, and she could not lift them. She got up at 4 in the morning, when Trumpet colicked, and she walked him till the sun came up, and she never told my papa because he had been up 2 nights. She put a peg on the wall for my coat that is low enough for me. She learned my mama's bread out of my mama's book so it would taste right. And she cried in the pantry doing it, and she thought I did not see. The girl's chin was going now, but her voice did not. "You laugh at my papa's face. My papa's face is like that because he went in the fire. He went in for my mama, and he went in for the horses, and he came out with the horses, and he has to know that every day of his whole life." She looked around that yard, every table, every gloved hand. "There is not one of you would have gone in." Silas Rourke had come 3 steps through the gate and stopped, and his hat was crushed in his good hand. Nell turned around. She looked at Ada, and her face came apart all at once the way a child's does. "There is a bag under the wagon seat," she said. "I saw it. I saw it last night, and I saw it this morning, and I have had my hand on it the whole way in." She was crying then, out loud in front of the entire county. "Please do not get on the stage. Please, I know you are not my mama. I know it. But you can be my mama anyway, if you want to, and I want you to. I want you to so much." And then, in the flat middle of that churchyard, with 200 people standing over their plates and not one of them breathing, that child said it. "Please stay." Mama, Ada Merrick got around the end of that table without any memory of doing it. She went down on her knees in the dirt in her good dress and got both arms around that little girl and held on. And Nell's arms came around her neck and locked there, and Ada put her face in the child's hair and said the only word she had, which was yes, and then said it about 9 more times. Nobody laughed. There was no laughing left anywhere in Crow Hollow that afternoon. Delphine Pruitt was standing by the coffee urn with tears going straight down into her collar, and a man by the horseshoe pit took his hat off and did not seem to know he had done it, and Cordelia Boyd sat down. Silas Rourke did not say anything. He came and stood over the both of them for a moment, with his hand not quite touching Ada's shoulder. Then he walked to the wagon, and he reached under the seat, and he took out the carpet bag, and he carried it back through that silent yard, and set it down at the foot of the church steps in front of everybody, and he opened it, and he took out the 2 folded dresses and put them over his arm, like a man carrying his own coat home. That was all. He did not make a speech. He never made a speech in his life. Then he took the folded paper out of his breast pocket and held it out to Ada. "I was at the bank at 10, he said. "That is why I would not tell you." She got up off her knees with Nell still hanging on her hand and unfolded it in the sun. It was a deed. It was the deed to 160 acres in the fold of country 9 miles northwest, the bottomland and the creek and the new barn and the house of silver lumber, and it was made out in 2 names. Silas Rourke. Ada Rourke. "I sold Boyd nothing," he said. "I went to Amos Teague on Wednesday night and sold him the 40 acres east of the creek at fair price. Because Teague is a decent man and Boyd is not, and I paid that note off at 10 o'clock this morning in front of 2 witnesses, and I made Boyd write out a receipt in his own hand. Then I had Wheeler put your name on this." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It took me 4 tries at the desk. I have not had much cause to write since I was a boy, and I would not have it spelled wrong. Not yours." Ada looked at the deed. Her name at the bottom of it in the clerk's copperplate, and above it, in the margin where a man practices, 4 attempts in pencil at ADA, the first 3 crossed out. "You did this Wednesday," she said. "You did this before today." Before she said any of it. "I did it Wednesday." Why? Silas Rourke stood in the middle of the churchyard where every soul in the county could see him, and he turned his head, and he put the burned side of his face full into the light, toward her, and he left it there. "Because you are the only person in 3 years who looked at that side of me," he said, and then went right on talking about the interest. The winter came in hard the 2nd week of November and stayed until the middle of April, and the Rourke place got through it with 62 head and a full root cellar and a woman in the kitchen who could stretch a barrel of flour further than anybody in the county had a right to expect. By the door there were 3 coats on 3 pegs. The bottom peg was still the piece of broom handle a child had driven in with a rock, except that a man had gone at it one evening with a plane and a drill and set it true, and he had kept the bent nail, and it lived in his vest pocket where his fingers found it about twice a day. Nell talked now. Nell talked from before the lamp was lit until after it was out, in the loft, to the ceiling, until Ada came up the ladder to tell her that even a girl making up for 3 years had to sleep sometime. It was the 2nd Sunday in April when they were bringing the milk cow up from the creek, and the ground had thawed to that particular kind of gumbo that will take a man's boot and keep it, and Silas Rourke went down in it flat on his back with the halter rope still in his hand and his hat sailing off into the willows. He sat up in the mud and looked at his hat. And Nell laughed. It came out of her ragged and startled, like something knocking a window open from the inside, and then it got hold of her and doubled her over with her hands on her knees, and she laughed until she had to sit down in the wet grass, and Silas Rourke sat in the mud 9 miles from Crow Hollow, with the burned side of his face turned up to the sun, and listened to it. Ada stood at the top of the rise with the empty pail on her arm. She had been laughed at in that country for 8 years, and had learned every sound of it. This was not that sound. This was the other one. The one she had never in her whole life been on the inside of, and she stood there in the April wind with her chapped hand over her mouth and let it come all the way up the hill to her. And she did not move until the cow got tired of waiting and started up without them.